Today, we're digging into a legal mystery. It's a constitutional ghost story, really, about a principle that everyone, and I mean everyone, thought was dead and buried for almost 100 years. But as it turns out, the reports of its death were, well, greatly exaggerated. For decades, this was the line. You'd hear it in law school, you'd read it in textbooks. The non-delegation doctrine, oh, that's a relic. It's a ghost from a time before the New Deal, something that was cast aside and forgotten. But here's the twist in our story. While all eyes were on the U.S. Supreme Court, something really incredible was happening in courtrooms all across the country. In the States, this so-called dead doctrine wasn't just surviving, it was actually thriving.
So how in the world did everyone get the stories so wrong? To really get what's going on, we have to start with the myth of how it supposedly died in the first place.
Okay, so the traditional story goes like this. It's the 1930s. FDR's New Deal is massively expanding the federal government's power. The Supreme Court, after a bit of a fight, basically has this constitutional revolution. And in that shuffle, a bunch of old ideas that limited government power got tossed out. The non-delegation doctrine was supposedly casualty number one.
But here's the thing. Researchers at the Notre Dame Law Review decided to look past those few famous Supreme Court cases. They dug into over 1,000 cases from state and lower federal courts, and what they found completely flips the old story on its head. But before we get to their findings, we need to be clear on what this doctrine actually is.
So let's break it down. What is non-delegation? At its heart, it's really all about who gets to make the rules we live by. To put it simply, our constitutions, both federal and state, give the power to make laws to the legislature, the people we actually elect. The non-delegation doctrine just says they can't turn around and hand off that core power to someone else. They can't just give an agency a blank check and say, hey, you guys figure out what the law should be. And this brings us to a really key distinction. Think of it like a recipe. The legislature's job is to write the recipe. That's making the law, deciding the big policy questions. An agency's job is to follow the recipe, to execute that law. Sure, they can handle the details, but only if the legislature gives them clear instructions. They can't just invent a whole new dish on their own.
Okay, so this is where the data shows this massive split, this huge difference between how the doctrine gets treated at the federal level versus in the states. Let's just look at the numbers.
So get this, since 1940, right after the New Deal supposedly killed it, these non-delegation challenges have succeeded about 15% of the time. Now, that might not sound huge, but in the legal world, that is far from dead. A 1 in 7 success rate is actually pretty good. To give you some perspective, that's a higher success rate than you see for certain Fourth Amendment challenges in criminal cases.
And here is the great divide. This is why everyone thought the doctrine was dead. They were only looking at federal courts, where it has a tiny 3% success rate. But look at the state courts, it's 16%. This is where all the action has been. State courts have been consistently enforcing this idea for decades, while the federal story created this national myth.
So let's just trace this journey, right? In the 1930s, okay, sure, the doctrine does kind of fade from view at the federal level, but then something amazing happens. For the next 40 years, from 1940 to 1980, the number of these cases filed in state courts actually goes up, and it's still a vital legal tool today. So far from being killed off, the post-New Deal era gave this doctrine a new, vibrant home in the states. All right, so this is a fascinating legal story for sure, but why does it matter to you? Well, because this delegated power leads to thousands and thousands of rules that affect our jobs, our businesses, and our everyday lives.
So what kind of rules are we even talking about here? When a legislature tells an agency to fill in the details, what does that actually look like when the rubber meets the road?
As Ohio Supreme Court Justice Patrick DeWine points out, state-level administrative law is a huge deal. We're talking everything from professional licensing boards for your job to insurance regulations. These state agency rules can affect us just as much, if not more, than any federal regulation. Let's look at some real-world examples from North Dakota. One agency rule, it sets a $100 fee for bait vendors. Another one fines electrologists $25 a day. An agency can even decide to make transporting bait without a permit a criminal misdemeanor. Now think about that. These aren't laws passed by elected officials. They're rules with real penalties created by agencies using power that was given to them.
And that brings us to the most important point of all. This isn't really about being for or against regulation. It's about asking a much more fundamental question. Who actually has the power to make these rules in the first place?
For a long, long time, the whole debate has been framed around this idea of deference. Should courts just defer to what the agency experts say? But a lot of state judges, like Justice DeWine, are arguing that focusing on that has made us miss the real issue entirely. And here's the key insight from him. Before we even get to the question of whether to defer to an agency, we have to ask a simpler question. Did the legislature actually give the agency the authority to make this specific rule? Was this power truly delegated to begin with? So ultimately, that's the question at the heart of every single one of these cases. Did our elected lawmakers set a clear policy for the agency to follow, or did they just throw up their hands and give a blank check to a bunch of unelected officials to write new laws? So you see, the non-delegation doctrine is no ghost story. It's a living, breathing principle that protects a really core idea: accountability. It forces us to ask a simple question about all these rules that shape our lives. Who wrote this? Was it the people we elected to make laws, or was it someone else? And the answer to that question matters just as much today as it did at the nation's founding.